One, my stepdaughter said I was a disgrace, not a father. I dropped her from my insurance and left her to her mother. Her pride ended in the ER. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. You're not my real dad. Josh spat those words at me when he was 17, standing at the bottom of the stairs with his arms folded like a soldier defying an enemy. He didn't shout them in anger, he declared them like a fact. Like the law of nature that I would never belong. He wanted it to sting, and it did. His sister Mia, 15, leaned against the banister and smirked, delighted to see me put back in my place. I stood there gripping the car keys I had just taken from him. His grades had plummeted, he had mouthed off to a teacher, and I told him the car was mine until he shaped up. But in that moment, as his words sank in, I realized the punishment meant nothing. The car wasn't the real battle. The real fight was for a place in a family that had already decided I was an outsider. I'm 47 years old. I married Laura when she was 40. She was beautiful in the way some women are after hardship, weathered but resilient. She had 2 children from her first marriage, Josh and Mia, and their father Mark. Mark was the type of man who always promised to be at the recital, at the game, at the parent-teacher meeting, but never showed. Work, he always said, or traffic, or next time, I swear. The kids clung to his excuses like gospel, never blaming him, never daring to see the truth. He chose absence. When I came along, I thought I could fill the void. I thought if I poured myself into them, gave them everything I had, I could stitch the family together where Mark had left it torn. So I gave. God, how I gave. I paid for Josh's basketball tournaments, the uniforms, the travel expenses. I paid for Mia's braces, for the dentist visits, for the endless appointments Laura couldn't cover on her salary. When Josh's phone broke, I replaced it. When Mia wanted her first car, I bought it. When they needed laptops for school, I wrote the checks. Insurance, groceries, clothes, vacations, medical bills, I carried it all. And yet, no matter how much I provided, they made sure the world knew I was never dad. Around their friends, I wasn't even stepdad. I was mom's husband. Those 2 words, sharp, clipped, dismissive, turned me into nothing more than a roommate who happened to pay the bills. When their friends asked, "Who's that?" they didn't hesitate. They made sure everyone knew I was a placeholder, a man orbiting their real father's shadow. At birthdays, when I set up the decorations, cooked, cleaned, and paid for every cake and every candle, they'd wait for Mark to arrive. And when he didn't, they would sigh but excuse him, then look right past me as if my efforts were invisible. One Christmas, Mark promised to visit. He didn't. Instead, he sent a text that read, "Sorry, kids, busy this year. I'll make it up to you." I was the one stringing up the lights, buying the gifts, paying for the feast. But when Josh and Mia unwrapped their presents, their faces fell because his name wasn't on the tag. And when I asked, "What's wrong?" Josh muttered, "Dad would have gotten us something better." That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, the tree glowing softly beside me, realizing I had spent thousands of dollars just to be reminded that I was a substitute. Still, I kept going, because I told myself that fatherhood wasn't about blood, that consistency mattered more than DNA, that showing up day after day would one day mean something. But it never did. Every time they ignored me, Laura filled the silence with excuses. "They're teenagers," she said. "They're just moody." Or worse, she turned it back on me. "Don't take it personally. You're too sensitive." Her silence cut sharper than their insults, because in her refusal to defend me, she told them, without words, that their treatment of me was acceptable. I remember once, after Mia called me mom's husband at the dinner table, I looked at Laura, waiting for her to correct her. She didn't. She just shrugged, as if I should be grateful to even have a seat there. That shrug told me everything. In her eyes, I was optional too. And so the years passed in a rhythm of giving and rejection. I worked long hours, drained myself dry, and came home to children who treated me like a stranger in my own house. Every sacrifice I made was met with indifference. Every boundary I tried to set was mocked. Every kindness was dismissed. But the truth was clear, Even if I didn't want to admit it back then, I wasn't a father to them. I was an ATM, a convenient provider who paid for their comfort while they glorified a man who abandoned them. The irony was unbearable. Mark, the man who disappeared for weeks, who broke every promise, who never paid a dime toward their real needs, was still Dad. He was still the hero in their eyes, the man they held up on a pedestal, while I, who stayed, who worked, who bled for them, was just Mom's husband. I told myself it didn't matter, that love takes time, that one day, maybe when they were older, they'd look back and realize who had really been there. I clung to that hope like a fool. But that night, when Josh sneered at me, "You're not my real dad," I finally felt the foundation cracking, because deep down, I knew he wasn't lashing out in anger. He was telling me the truth he had always believed. It was a Tuesday night when the mask finally slipped. Dinner was supposed to be simple. Laura had cooked pasta. I'd poured the wine. The television murmured in the background. But Josh decided he wanted to go on a trip with his friends. A weekend away that would cost hundreds of dollars I wasn't willing to waste. He announced it at the table like it was already decided, like my approval was irrelevant. When I told him no, that I wasn't funding another reckless getaway, he dropped his fork, leaned back in his chair, and delivered the sentence that burned itself into my bones. "You're a disgrace, not a father, just some guy sitting here pretending." Mia giggled under her breath, the way she always did when her brother went for blood. Laura froze for a moment, then sighed, shook her head, and said, "He's a teenager. Don't take it to heart." But I did take it to heart. I had no choice. Her words, her dismissal, were gasoline on the fire. I stared at Josh, his smirk daring me to react, and something inside me broke. Years of sacrifice, years of swallowing insults, years of being treated like a wallet with no face. They all condensed into a single razor-sharp truth. I had only ever been their ATM, not their father, not their guide, not even their stepfather in any real sense. Just the man who paid the bills while they spit in his face. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the house had gone quiet, I sat alone at the dining table. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting shadows over the stack of bills in front of me. My hands trembled as I sifted through them. Insurance, groceries, utilities, extracurriculars. Each sheet of paper was another reminder of what I carried alone. And as I stared at the totals, I realized something. I didn't have to carry it anymore. The decision came with a kind of cold clarity. A line drawn in permanent ink. The next morning, I made my move. First, I called the insurance company. "Remove Mia Collins from my plan," I said. My voice didn't waver. The representative asked if I was sure. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my life. Second, I stopped every auto payment linked to them. No more allowances. No more school extras. No more hidden costs bleeding me dry. I told Laura that from now on, my money would cover groceries, utilities, and the mortgage, our household. Nothing else. If Josh or Mia wanted luxuries, their real father could step up. That same afternoon, Josh cornered me. He wanted cash for his school trip. His voice carried the same entitled tone he always used, the same expectation that I'd cave. But this time, I didn't. I looked him in the eye and said, "Ask Mark. He's your father." The silence that followed was delicious. For the first time, he realized the faucet had run dry. Laura tried to soften it. She told me I was being harsh, that I couldn't just cut them off. I reminded her, calmly, that I'd been paying for children who rejected me for years, and that if she truly believed Mark was their father, then it was time for him to prove it. She didn't have an answer. Over the next week, the house shifted. The air grew heavier, the silence more pointed. Mia stomped around like a spoiled princess whose tiara had been stolen. Josh slammed doors, muttered curses, called me names under his breath. But I didn't flinch, because for the first time in years I wasn't being used. The breaking point had come, and I had chosen myself. I began to notice things I had ignored before. How Josh wore the expensive sneakers I had bought him but never once said thank you. How Mia drove the car I'd purchased for her but called me Mom's husband when her friends were around. How Laura let every insult pass unchecked, never once standing up for me, never once demanding her children show me respect. I remembered a night months earlier when Mia had complained that her father hadn't called on her birthday. She cried in her room, devastated. I was the one who sat with her, who handed her tissues, who told her she deserved better. I was the one who drove into town, bought her the necklace she had been eyeing, and gave it to her as a surprise. She wore it for a week, then tossed it in a drawer, forgotten. And when her friends asked where it came from, she lied. She said, "Dad bought it. That was my reward." I began to see every sacrifice for what it was, wasted. So I tightened the lines. No more extras. No more indulgences. I told Laura plainly, groceries, yes. Utilities, yes. Mortgage, yes. But if Josh wants spending money, he can go to Mark. If Mia needs repairs on her car, Mark can cover it. I will not continue to bankroll children who openly despise me. Laura accused me of being cold. She said I was punishing them for being young, for not knowing how to handle a complicated family. But I reminded her that respect isn't complicated. Gratitude isn't complicated. And after years of silence, sneers, and mockery, I wasn't interested in excuses anymore. The kids didn't take it well. Josh stormed into the living room one evening, waving a crumpled flyer about his school trip. "You're ruining my life," he shouted. "Everyone else is going. You're just jealous you're not my real dad." I stood, calm, unshaken. "Exactly. I'm not your real dad. Which means I don't have to pay for you anymore." His face twisted in rage. He called me names, words meant to provoke. But I just walked past him, poured myself a drink, and let his fury echo in the walls. Because I had finally learned the truth. You cannot buy love, and you cannot purchase respect. Every night after that, I slept easier. Not happy, not vindicated, but free. Free from the weight of being used. Free from the lie that my sacrifices would ever be enough. The breaking point had come, and I had crossed it. From that moment on, I was done playing the fool. Mark. The name had always been a ghost in our house. It hung in the air during arguments, during birthdays, during quiet moments when Mia would sigh and ask, "Do you think Dad will call?" Mark was the ever-absent presence, the shadow whose outline they never stopped tracing. I had spent years competing with him, though he hadn't even been there to fight. And still, somehow, I was always the one losing. When I finally cut off the cash, when Josh and Mia realized that my money no longer flowed like an endless stream, their first reaction wasn't to adjust. It was to call him. Josh dialed him angrily from his room one evening, pacing the floor loud enough that I could hear every word through the thin drywall. "He says it's your responsibility now. He says you're supposed to pay. So are you going to or not?" There was silence after that, long enough that I imagined Mark's weary sigh on the other end, his excuses stacking like cards. Josh barked back, "You always say that. Just do it this time." Then the door slammed. Mia wasn't much better. She locked herself in her room for hours, texting furiously. When she finally emerged, she carried a package under her arm. I recognized the shipping label. It was from him. She tore it open on the couch. Out spilled a cheap floral dress, poorly folded, with a handwritten note tucked inside. "You already have someone who takes care of you. Be grateful." I laughed out loud when I read it. Even he knew. Even Mark, the man they worshipped, the man who couldn't be bothered to drive 3 hours to see his children, understood the truth. I had been carrying them. Not him. Me. Mia's face crumpled, though she tried to hide it. Josh muttered something about "Dad's busy," but his voice lacked conviction. For the first time, I saw it flicker, the doubt, the cracks in the myth of their hero. But instead of gratitude, instead of apology, they turned their fury on me. "You put him up to this," Mia snapped. "You made him say that. You're trying to turn us against him." I stared at her, cold. "No, Mia. He turned you against himself. I just stopped protecting you from the truth." Laura didn't defend me. She never did. Instead, she cornered me later that night, her voice sharp, brittle with anger. "You don't have to be so smug. You think you're teaching them some lesson, but all you're doing is tearing the family apart. You're being passive-aggressive. Passive-aggressive, I repeated, almost amused. I cut off thousands of dollars in spending. That's not passive, Laura. That's direct. She tried to argue, but I was past the point of caring. Every word she spoke sounded less like a wife defending her husband and more like a woman protecting the fragile illusion she had built around her children's absent father. The next morning, I gathered every receipt, every bill, every statement that proved what I had given them. Tuition, braces, sports, gadgets, trips, the car. I packed every item I had bought into boxes. Josh's sneakers, Mia's electronics, even the little luxuries they had long taken for granted. And then I did something that sealed the line forever. I drove to Mark's house. It wasn't far, just a shabby single-story on the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the yard overgrown, the car in the driveway missing a hubcap. He lived like a man who had surrendered, who had no intention of building anything worth holding on to. I hauled the boxes to his porch, one by one, stacking them like evidence. On each, I taped a note in thick black marker. From Stepdad, not Dad. When the last box thudded down, I rang the bell. Mark opened the door slowly, his face groggy, eyes narrowing as he took in the mountain of his own failure sitting on his porch. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. "This," I said, "is everything your children swore came from you. Every gift, every luxury, every necessity. You can keep it. I'm done." His mouth opened, but I didn't wait for a reply. I turned, walked back to my truck, and drove away. That evening, before I returned home, I made one final stop. I played Laura a recording I had kept on my phone for weeks. A recording of Josh laughing with Mia, mocking me. His words were seared into me, but I wanted her to hear them herself. "He's not family. He's just there to pay." The sound of it filled the kitchen. Laura's face drained of color. For a moment, she looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. But I didn't care. Whatever realization she came to was hers alone. I had crossed my line. From now on, Mark would carry his own children, or more likely, they would learn what it feels like to stand without the cushion of a man they had dismissed for years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not happy, not vindicated, but free. The silence after my decision was louder than any argument. Laura moved around the house like a ghost. She still set the table, still folded the laundry, still tried to keep the illusion of family alive, but she wouldn't look at me. Her silence was its own accusation. The kids, meanwhile, responded with venom. Josh muttered curses under his breath whenever I entered a room. Mia slammed her bedroom door, blasted music, paraded her bitterness like a crown. But there was something else underneath it, something I recognized immediately. Panic. They had lived their whole lives cushioned by my wallet. They had grown up believing that money appeared by magic, that their lives would always be padded by someone else's sacrifice. Now the cushion was gone, and the floor beneath them was stone. It didn't take long for reality to find them. A week later, the phone rang. Laura answered, her voice tense. Within seconds, she was crying. Mia had been injured at a school event. A fall, nothing fatal, but serious enough that she needed urgent care. They rushed her to the hospital. I arrived not long after, walking into the fluorescent-lit waiting room where Laura sat pale and trembling, clutching paperwork. "Insurance," the nurse said, holding out a clipboard. Laura looked at me, her eyes pleading. I shook my head. "She's not on my plan anymore. You know that." Her mouth opened, but no words came. The realization hit her all at once. In my silence, in my cold certainty, I had forced her to see the truth. She had left me to carry everything for years, and now, when it mattered most, she was holding an empty bag. The bills were hers. The responsibility was hers. And Mark? He was gone. He hadn't even answered his phone. That night, Laura cried beside Mia's hospital bed. Josh sat in the corner, arms folded, glaring at me as if I were the villain, as if I had inflicted the injury myself. But beneath his glare, I saw fear. He knew his college tuition wasn't coming. He knew his trips were canceled. He knew the fantasy had collapsed. And me? I felt nothing but peace. For years, I had bled myself dry, carrying children who despised me and a wife who enabled it. Now the burden was gone. The collapse wasn't mine to stop. A month passed. The house grew quieter. Laura stopped fighting me, stopped asking me to reconsider. Maybe she realized the futility. Maybe she finally understood the years of ingratitude I had endured. Or maybe she was simply too tired. The kids moped around, texting Mark endlessly, begging for scraps of his attention. He never showed. He never sent money. He never took responsibility. And in the ruins of their pride, they began to see. Came in the form of a letter. One evening, I found it slipped under my office door. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, but familiar. It was Mia's. I see now that I was wrong. I'm sorry. Just those words. No excuses, no explanations. Short, raw. A confession from a girl who had finally realized that her hero would never save her. That the man she had mocked was the only one who had ever carried her. I keep that letter. Not pinned to the wall, not flaunted as a trophy, but folded carefully inside an envelope with the receipts. Thousands of dollars of proof, every payment, every sacrifice. Together, they tell the story of my years in that house. The price of love given freely and rejected without hesitation. Sometimes I open it. I read her words. I wonder if they were born of true understanding, or just the desperation of a child abandoned by the father she glorified. Either way, it doesn't matter. The truth has already been written. You cannot force love where people only see a wallet. I think about Mark often, though never with envy. He will always be Dad to them, the man they hold above me even as he vanishes again and again. He lives in their imagination as a hero, even while reality proves otherwise. And me? I was the one who stayed. I was the one who worked. I was the one who paid. Yet in the story they tell themselves, I will never be more than Mom's husband. Maybe that's the cruelest part. Not the insults, not the mockery, not even the betrayal, but the knowledge that devotion means nothing when weighed against blood, even when that blood is poisoned by absence. But I refuse to regret my choice, because the day I stopped paying was the day I reclaimed myself. I was no longer a slave to their contempt. I was no longer a man fooled into believing that sacrifice would buy me respect. I was simply free. Josh still avoids me in the halls, still mutters under his breath. His college fund is gone, and the reality of it looms closer every day. Mia is quieter now, less cruel, perhaps chastened by her hospital stay and the letter she wrote. Laura drifts between us all like a ghost, her silence the only thing left of her loyalty. Maybe one day they will all come crawling back. Maybe one day they will beg for forgiveness, for support, for the safety net I once provided. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll cling to the illusion of Mark forever, even as he fails them again and again. Either way, it no longer matters. I gave them my best years, my labor, my money, my devotion. I asked for nothing in return but respect. They spat on it. And when I finally walked away, the world did not end. It simply revealed the truth. They had needed me more than I ever needed them. So now I sit with my letter, my receipts, my memories of a battle fought in silence. And I ask myself, without bitterness, without rage, just a cold, honest question. Was I wrong? Would you have endured it? Or would you, like me, have drawn the line and walked away from a family that never wanted you, except as a wallet?